Actually, Charlie, fine arts was not one of my portfolios. I am, for my sins, only an economist. Good evening. Welcome to Rice and this evening's address by His Excellency Nambaryn Enkhbayar, Prime Minister of Mongolia. Rice University and the James A. Baker III Institute for Public Policy are very pleased to co-sponsor this event with Asia Society of Texas. Very few countries, probably no other country, illustrates better the geopolitical shifts of the last century more than Mongolia. In 1921, Mongolia became the first country to establish a communist government after the Bolsheviks seized power in Russia. In 1990, Mongolia was the first former communist nation to hold free, multi-party elections. 10 years and several parliamentary elections later, Mr. Enkhbayar became his country's 21st Prime Minister in August of 2000. Mr. Enkhbayar was born in 1958 in the capital of Mongolia, Ulaanbaatar. He graduated from Moscow's Literature Institute in 1980 and later studied English literature at Leeds University in Britain. He put his language skills to very fruitful use in 1980 to 1990 as a translator and head of the department of the Association of Mongolian Writers. He is fluent in Russian as well as English. He is the only leader of the world who has translated the works of Charles Dickens and James Joyce in any language, and certainly the only one to have translated them into Mongolian. In 1990, Mr. Enkhbayar became vice chair of Mongolia's Culture and Art Development Committee, and that's a position he held until 1992. That year, his commitment to his nation's Buddhist heritage led him to head up the Government Commission on the erection of, and I'm going to really try to do well on this pronunciation of this one, on the statue of Avalokiteshvara. Close? It's a long word. That's the Buddha of compassion in Tibetan and Mongolian Buddhism. In 1995, he accepted leadership of the Mongolian National Council of Museums. Mr. Enkhbayar's political career began in 1985 when he became a member of the Mongolian People's Revolutionary Party. He was elected to Parliament in 1992 and appointed Minister of Culture. The MPRP noticed his political talents and chose him as its Secretary General in 1966, and in 1997 as chairman, he became chairman. In the year 2000, his party won 72 of Parliament's 76 seats under his leadership and selected him as Prime Minister. Prime Minister Enkhbayar is a dedicated reformer. He has said that his government's role should be, and I quote, to give opportunity to each person to become something like the American dream, unquote. Along those lines, he has endorsed several forward-looking policies to develop his country's landlocked economy. Last February, his government announced its intention to establish a commission on information and communication technology in Mongolia. Banking reforms he has done. He has launched entrepreneurial training and improvements in credit arrangements as well. These are vital parts of his country's decentralization policies. Now, many of you know that the nature has not been kind to Mongolia in the last 2 or 3 years and has suffered severe winters in that period. Nevertheless, this striving nation has made important progress toward a market economy. The private sector accounted for only 10% of Mongolia's gross domestic product in 1990, and today it contributes 70%, 70, of the nation's economic output. Inflation, always difficult to tame, has been forced down from 50% in 1995 to 6% in the latest government statistics. Mr. Enkhbayar's commitment to the private sector and to efficient government will, without question, help pave the way to sustained development for Mongolia in this new century. His proposed Millennium Highway, which is a 2,400-kilometer road to traverse his country from east to west, is a very bold part of his strategy. So please join me in welcoming this evening's guest, His Excellency Prime Minister Nambaryn Enkhbayar.
President, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, I am really very much honored to be here at the James Baker Institute to speak in front of you on Mongolia. Before starting my speech, I just want to make a very small correction to what the President said just now. Because today in the morning I had also speech at the Texas Wesleyan University, and I tried to explain why all these democratic changes started in Mongolia. Because Mongolians wanted to become from some things to someone's. That's why I'm saying that I would like to make every person in my country to become not something but someone. That's the correction I just want to make. And today's subject was, I think, Mongolia, China and Russia and other neighbors. Mongolia is a country which was the most known country in the world in the 13th century. At that time, a man named here Genghis Khan, and we used to call him Genghis Khan, he conquered many countries. Now Mongolia, unfortunately, one of the least known countries in the world. So our mission is also to make Mongolia known, but known in a very civilized way, as a country of democracy and development. As you know, Mongolia geographically is squeezed between two superpowers, China and Russia. And the leader of one of these superpowers I heard talked here at the James Baker Institute quite recently. Russia is our northern neighbor. One argues, and under one I imply some Mongolians argue that Russia is a creation by Mongolians. Many centuries ago, Russia was divided into many small kingdoms, and the Mongolian conquerors conquered all these kingdoms to make one big Russia. And that Russia is still staying today. And that Russia was unified around Moscow. That's why many Mongolians do consider that Russian is a creation of Mongolians. We do have also Mongolian nationalities, Kalmyks and Buryats, living in Russia. These are the small nationalities living there and becoming of that part of that country. Many Mongolians, and I think many Russians, do consider that Russia is not a European country. It's also not an Asian country. It is rather a Eurasian country. That's why there is always a difficulty when Russians try to explain who they are. There is always a problem of identity. There is always a search whether we are the descendants of Mongols and Asians, or whether we are the descendants of Europeans. For many years, from 1921 till 1990, in the last century, Mongolia and Russia, at that time it was the Soviet Union, were in the same bloc. At that time it was dominated by the Soviet Russia or Soviet Union. To the south, we have China. Many Mongolians do also believe that China is also a creation of Mongols, because Kublai Khan brought the capital of China to Beijing, and Beijing became the center of China. At that time when Genghis Khan conquered, or Chinggis Khan, I rather call him by Mongolian name, Chinggis Khan, conquered China, China was divided into no less than 3 kingdoms. So many Mongolians do believe that China is also our creation. We do also have Indo-Mongolians living in China. In fact, they make up to 4 million people. I don't know how many of them do speak Mongolian, but they say that there are 4 million Mongolians living in China. About Russia and China, we do have many centuries long relationships. Sometimes we were on war, sometimes we were friends. Today we have very normal relationships with these 2 countries. We are historic and geographic neighbors. We do have, I think we have learned somehow to live together. And I hope that we will live together in a very normal relationships for many years to come. Now about Mongolia. The first Mongolian empire under the Chinggis Khan rule was founded in 1206. So in the year 2006, we will celebrate the 800th anniversary of Mongolian statehood. So we try to pretend that we are older than you. At that time, it was, I just tried to give some characteristics of that empire as we see that empire in the past. Because many see that empire, I mean that Mongolian empire of 1206 quite differently. Many think that that was a very cruel empire, that was a very backward empire, that was a very cruel conqueror. But we think that Chinggis Khan was the father of the nation, founder of Mongolian statehood. He invented many good things, we think, which still are very useful today. For example, he has invented golden pass, a gold metal, golden pass, which served as a passport to go to different other lands without any problems, to trade with the different other lands without any problems. The most sort of difficult thing, or from what he got most angry, I mean Chinggis Khan, was murdering his trade representatives. That's why he also was very cruel with those who killed his trade representatives. It was also an empire of freedom of different religions. At that time, it was the empire consisting of Christians, Buddhists, Muslims, of shamans, like at that time Mongolians were. That country also was a country of unified tax system. There was only one tax, I think, for that whole empire to collect. So there were some inventions which were quite modern at that time and still very important today. Unfortunately, Mongolians were at rise, and then was also were on decline. Manchu tribe, nationality in the northeastern part of Asia or China, conquered both China and Mongolia. And for many centuries, more than 250 years, Mongolians were under Manchu rule, till the beginning of the 20th century. At the same time, we do have to say that Mongolia was and still is a country of Buddhist heritage. In fact, Kublai Khan, a very well-known descendant of Genghis Khan, was himself an emperor who declared that his empire's religion of state is Buddhism. That's why he invited many Tibetan lamas to serve in his court. And you remember, I think, that he invited also many Western people, including Marco Polo, to have a trade on behalf of him with other lands. In 1911, we got autonomy from Manchu Qin Empire. And in 1921, we, with the assistance of the then Soviet Russia, there was the revolution in Mongolia. The Soviets at that time wanted to spread the communist ideology all over the world. At that time, Mongolians wanted to get rid of the Manchu rulers and the Manchu rulers. That was the sort of place where these two nations met. And we went together from that time on. At that time of history of Mongolia, we got the largest amount of investment based on pure ideology. Because of communist ideology, Russians wanted to spread at that time. They invested heavily into Mongolia. They invested into education, and today we can say that approximately 96–97% of Mongolians are people who can read and write, so the literacy rate is quite high. There was huge investment also into a modern healthcare system in Mongolia. We have, I think, very low rate of mortality, of maternal mortality and child mortality in Mongolia. We have investment also into industry, in founding and building and planning and constructing cities. At the same time, it was one of the most non-democratic structure of government in Mongolia. The whole economic structure was very much aid-oriented, very unflexible, very unproductive. So in 1990s, when democracy came to Mongolia under the influence of Russian perestroika, which started in 1985, Mongolians decided to make all these changes into both directions. First political, second economic. With political changes, we have adopted a new constitution of 1992, and we decided that we become a parliamentary republic, a parliamentary form of government. There was a debate at that time whether we go for parliamentary form of government or for presidential form of government. And at that time, and still we are very conscious and very careful that Mongolia could turn back and have a dictator. That's why we decided that the parliamentary form of government is better than the presidential form of government. It's better that people who, from somethings, who became someone's, sit together and decide on their behalf what to do, how to develop this country, instead of hoping that one Messiah will come down on the earth in Mongolia and develop that country. That's why I'm always keeping on saying that every Mongolian should have a chance to become from something to someone. That's why all these democratic changes are in Mongolia. That's why this government is working in Mongolia. About the economic changes, we have a big, we have started big privatization program because the real substance of private market-oriented economy is private property. For the last 10, 11 years, we have, I think, developed quite well the legal system, the psychology and mentality of the people, protecting the private property. And there are a lot of questions people ask me around in many different other countries and also foreign correspondents, why Mongolians have succeeded in doing all this transition so peacefully. There are many factors which influenced this peaceful transition. I would say that because Mongolians are nomads. Nomads are people who used to adapt themselves very easily to the constantly changing outer world, whether it is snow or wind or dust or drought or snowfall or any other nation coming or we are going out. So the nomads are the people who adapt themselves very quickly to the outer changing world. Plus to that democratic changes were inevitable. Many Mongolians did understand this because at that time, in the beginning of the 90s, we did realize that we were too dependent on one country. So it's very difficult to be dependent on only one country. You have a totalitarian regime subsidized by that country and an economy which is subsidized by that country, very unproductive and unhealthy economy. And that country, which was, it was the former Soviet Union, had collapsed at that time and was in big, deep crisis. That country couldn't afford of sustaining that sort of subsidy towards Mongolia and other countries of that bloc. So we deeply understood at that time that Mongolia will be very insecure in future if it will be dependent only on one country or only on two countries. So at that time, it was the visit of James Baker. The government of President Bush Sr. of the United States of America was very supportive of all the changes which occurred in Mongolia. And James Baker came as the Secretary of State to Mongolia to support us. And he put forward for the first time a concept of a third neighbor for Mongolia, implying that third neighbor is a very broad sort of notion involving the United States, Europe, Japan, Korea, other countries, plus to our geographical neighbors. And we did understand that this concept of third neighbor is the right concept for us to develop further, to overcome the negative impacts of being a totalitarian regime, command economy, having two negative factors, extreme climatic conditions and landlockedness. That's why I think we were inevitable to make all these democratic changes. That's why we made it smoothly. There was no choice for us but to go that way. I think I'm very proud of Mongolians because they did understand this. That's why they went there without any hesitation. And all those opinion polls conducted for the many years of the last 10, 11 years always show that more than 80% of Mongolians do consider that was the right choice, to be democratic and to go for the market-oriented economy. So to have more neighbors, we had to be open. To have more neighbors, we had to be market-oriented economy. To develop, we had to have more neighbors because we felt that underdevelopment means insecurity in your independence. That's why to be developed, that's why to be secure about your future, you have to be developed. To be developed, you have to have many neighbors. To have many neighbors, you have to be democracy. To be democracy and to be market-oriented economy. It's very simple. That's why many Mongolians did understand that. Today, Mongolia is very uniquely situated, geographically also. We can say that our northern neighbor is a Christian, Orthodox Christian country. We can say that our southern neighbor is a Confucian country or a communist country. We can say that our western, not very distant, not maybe direct, but not very distant neighbor is a Muslim Central Asian republics of the former Soviet Union and Afghanistan. To the east, we have, not very far away from us, Japan and two Koreas. So Mongolians learned to be a buffer state between Russia and China. We are now learning and understanding that we are a buffer state, a Buddhist country, in this part of the world between Muslim world and Northeastern Asia, between Christian world and Confucian Asia, between northern country in transition, also Russia and Communist China, between the West and the East, between the North and the East and the South. We want to develop not because of just development. We also try to bring a message to small countries through the world, to North Korea, to Afghanistan, to other small countries in the world, that you have a chance to develop. You have a chance to be part of the civilized world. You have a chance to be included into this development process. You have a chance to be respected by other nations. But to do this, or to achieve that, or to reach that, you have also to be democratic, to be market-oriented, to have the same values as other civilized countries or civilized world has got. It's also very simple. But because there are some ignorant people still in the world, they don't understand the simplicity. When I met with President Bush in New York, we were talking about why this terror coming to the civilized world. It was very interesting to share with the President Bush that this attacks, barbaric attacks, come out of ignorant people, not only ignorant, but people who hate other cultures and other values. People who try to keep their people not as someone's, but somethings. They can use these people as something. They don't value their lives, They send these people because they think that they are just a thing, not a human being. That's why we try to bring that message to small countries, that small countries as a country of someone's. Plus to that, plus to our geographical neighbors, we do have also neighbors in our other figurative meanings. We have India and Tibet as our spiritual neighbors because we are a Buddhist country. Now with the Indian government, we develop a very good cooperation in information technology. With this high literacy rate in Mongolia and quite good educational system still we keep in Mongolia, we have a chance to become also another India. And we are very grateful to Indians that they are working with us. They brought to us 2,000 years ago a very wonderful religion, which is Buddhism. And now they are bringing to us very wonderful technology, which is information technology. And we do also remember that Taliban started destroying Brahmin Buddhas in Afghanistan. So we have to stop these people so that they don't destroy other monuments like Brahmin Buddhas or World Trade Centers. So we have to be together. There are distant relatives, Koreans and Japanese. Many Koreans and Japanese, they think that we have, either they are our descendants or we are their descendants. We don't mind whoever is descendant, but we have to have very close relationships. And taking into account the fact that 1/3 of our foreign aid is covered by Japan. Japan is a very important country for Mongolia because we are surviving through this transition also because of the support of the United States and because of the foreign aid of Japan. And Korea, approximately 17,000 Mongolians do work now in Korea. And Mongolians, because they are nomads, very family-oriented people. Imagine that each Mongolian working in Korea sending $200 a month back to their families. So it makes approximately $3 million going to Mongolia from Mongolians working in Korea. In a year, it makes $40 million. So Koreans are really helping us also to transform our country into a developed one. We also have a role to help Korea, or rather I would say Koreas. We always try to become, to be a mediator between two Koreas. We think that this is a role we can play as a neighboring country, but not as a direct neighbor. Koreans feel this, and when I met a few days ago with the South Korean Prime Minister in New York, we also talked about the role of Mongolia as a mediator between two Koreas. We can mediate between these two Koreas because we are not direct neighbors. It means very much to especially Northern Korea. We can mediate between these two Koreas because we are not a superpower. It also means very much to these two Koreas. That's why they think that Mongolia is not a threat to these two Koreas. Mongolia doesn't have any ambition, territorial or whatever ambition in regards of these two Koreas. That's why we think that we are neighbor of these two Koreas because we can mediate between these two Koreas. Plus to that, I would say that through Russia, or through former Soviet Union, we got values of European nations. Many Mongolians went to the former East Germany, to Hungary, to Poland, to Czech Republic, to study engineering, psychology, mining, law, economics. You can find many Mongolians speaking these languages. So sometimes foreigners call us Asian Europeans. We don't mind, because this is also true. That's why we consider Europe as our neighbor. And finally, we consider that the United States of America is our neighbor, because we speak the same language, not English and Mongolian, but the same language of democracy, the same language of market-oriented economy. And I requested President Julius to work with me as the Prime Minister to bring development to Mongolia, to help this country to grow and be an example to smaller nations, because the agenda of smaller nations is becoming very important, because there is no other, there shouldn't be any small forgotten countries, but there should be democratic and predictable and civilized world. That's why we think that we need your investment, we need your know-how, we need your technology. We think that it's very necessary for Mongolia, and we hope that it's very necessary also for the United States of America to have in that interesting part of the world your ally, a country in which you can be confident, a country you can predict, a country democratic, a country market-oriented. And we are very glad that during this visit we have talked with Boeing to do some business. It's also very necessary for us to be with Boeing. It's also very good for Boeing, because whatever small country Mongolia is, but this is a country which is expressing interest in Boeing and expressing its confidence in Boeing. We are very glad that with the American company which is called AES, we are going to start working in our energy sector. There is Soka International, a company which is investing into Mongolian economy in oil exploration, a company which is based in Texas. And they found that a deposit of 1.5 billion barrels of of oil. I speak sometimes Russian, so I use sometimes Russian word. Sorry. It's just a neighbor, you know. And 1.5 billion of oil. There is a hope and a kind of careful calculation of specialists that Mongolia do possess approximately 6 billion barrels of oil. We think that Sokoil will work with us, and we will develop that site so that Mongolia will be able to become a very important, also play quite a role in that part of the world. And finally, I would say that I think it's our duty to express in this difficult time for the people of America that we are with you. And I told it to President Bush. We are ready to provide airspace and land for your operations. We are ready to provide our infrastructure facilities for PR activities, so that people in that part of the world do understand that this war is not with the people, not with the ordinary people, but with the terrorists, with those people who hate other values and other opinions and other ideas, with those people who are ignorant about the existence of other civilized worlds. And we think that this is a long-term commitment and long-term relationships we will have with our neighbor, the United States of America. This is a third neighbor for you, for us, And it is the words which were used by James Baker. With this conclusion, I will thank you, and I'm ready, if there is any question, answer this question. Thank you.
On behalf of us all, we want to thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. I know, speaking for us all, we are not only more knowledgeable about Mongolia, but we're inspired by your words and by your vision. And we have a limited time, but we have many, many questions. So I'm going, well, before I do, not only through James Baker and this institute does Houston have a special relation and interest. I was reminded by Jim Royer right before we started that Secretary Baker was in Mongolia at the time of the Kuwait was invaded, and that he, I know, regretted not being here because of his special relationship with Mongolia. We have Chase Untitled in the audience who went there with a group of Americans at the time you were writing your Constitution to help provide insight based upon our experience. And one of the questions here is, when would you establish a consulate? And we're very pleased, we do have an honorary consulate of Mongolia, and your honorary consul's here. Ed Story, where are you, Ed? He was here.
He's there,
in the
yes,
back.
At the back.
And I see sitting in the back Joe Lake, a Texan who was, I think, one of the first ambassadors of the United States to Mongolia. And unfortunately, he's up in Dallas now. And we're pleased to have Ambassador Chonhoy, who we feel like is a friend. He's been here on many occasions to the Baker Institute and to the Asia Society Texas Center. But now to the questions. Prime Minister Enkhbayar. Currently, there is limited land ownership in Mongolia. How do you think land ownership will change in the coming years?
Yes, we are considering that this land reform is a very essential and important part of this whole reform agenda of the new government. We have been discussing with the President about how to develop Mongolia, how to bring development there. So I think development will come to Mongolia if a rural part of Mongolia is developed or has a chance to develop, an opportunity to be a part of this whole development process. So to do so, we are considering about land privatization, so that to give stimulus to the possible investors to invest into Mongolian economy and use land as means of economic relationships. Though we do not plan to privatize land in this capital city because it's too crowded, so we have to solve out also a problem of interesting people to stay there where they are and do live there and create domestic market and bring infrastructure there, run small and medium-sized enterprises there, so that the place they live could develop. So we have a plan not to privatize land in the capital city, but in the so-called centers of regional development. We have 8 places of so-called centers of regional development. These are the center of Kopdaimak in the west, one place in Zabkhaimak, one place which is called Karakorum, the ancient capital of Mongolians. One place is center of Central Aimak, which is 50 kilometers away from Ulaanbaatar city. So in order to develop the capital city, we have to develop alternative city nearby. We have already many industrial town cities, Erdenet and Darkhan. So we are planning to make land reform there also, and also at the center of Khentiaimak, where Chinggis Khan is from. So, and the center of Eastern Imak, which is called Choibasan. So these 8 places, we think, possible places for starting about a possibility of land privatization. I think this is something which will put more pace into economic reforms.
Thank you. We have several questions on China and what percentage of Mongolia's foreign trade is with China. Is this balance changing? And how will WTO, the entry of China and Taiwan into WTO, affect this?
Well, China is becoming one of the major trade partners. In fact, I think this is the major trade partner of Mongolia. Because many Mongolian herdsmen and so-called long traveling traders or small and medium-sized trade companies do trade with China. I think this trend will stay on for quite a few years. That with the growing economic cooperation between Russia and China, Mongolia wants also to benefit from these relationships because we are a sort of buffer country between these two huge countries. We think that with the pipelines going from Russia to China and bringing crude oil from Russia to China, or natural gas from Russia to China, or electricity from Russia to China, it's economically quite reasonable that these pipelines are put through Mongolia. Unfortunately, for many different reasons, including also economic reasons, Chinese government have decided that they will rather put that first crude oil pipeline around Mongolia. We are requesting the Chinese government to reconsider it if it's possible, and also consider that future pipelines carrying natural gas or transmission of electric power from Russia to China will be put through Mongolia, because this is also economically very viable. So that will make also grow the cooperation between Russia, China, and Mongolia. Plus to that, we do have now quite sort of difficulty in trade also, because these are the pluses. There are also some minuses, because Chinese and Russian governments still have quite high tariffs on the goods from Mongolia entering Chinese market or Russian market. Because we have brought down the import tariffs on the goods which are brought to Mongolia, because we are already a member of the WTO. So with the China becoming a member of the WTO, we think that barrier will come down, or will be coming down, and we hope it will be soon coming down. But there is also, this is a plus of China becoming a WTO country. But there is also one thing we have to be very careful about, is that there is some investment into Mongolia because of the quota. Because of a possibility that Mongolian companies' products could be sold at the United States market without any quota. So a lot of investment came to Mongolia, especially knitting factories, which produce some garments for the US market. So maybe with the Chinese accession to the WTO, these companies, some of them will go to China. So we have to make the conditions for these companies more favorable than they have today, so that they don't leave this country but work longer.
Very good. Next question. Many countries that have adopted democratic regimes still have problems upholding some of the basic democratic ideas. Do you believe that Mongolia fully respects and protects human rights?
Well, I do believe it, and there were many observers to the elections we had in Mongolia, and they said that these were the free and fair elections. There are many studies also done about Mongolia on our transition to democracy and market-oriented economy. And these studies also have shown that Mongolia was quite successful in doing so. And I do believe that we do have this respect of human rights in Mongolia. At the same time, we do understand that democracy is a very interesting phenomenon. It is a phenomenon which always make you, it doesn't let you rest. You always have to keep on working. So this is a challenge, and we are ready to take this challenge and work further.
A question from a member of the press. It says, what is Mongolia doing to prevent terrorism networks from operating within its borders? And a similar question, in your opinion, what advice can you give to the United States to help bring peace and progress to the Muslim part of the world?
Well, again, as I said, we do have some facilities so that they can be used, could be used by the United States of America for having some broadcasting to that part of the world where there is that war with the terrorists, so that the ordinary people do understand that this is not fight with them, but with the regimes or with a group of people who repress their people and carry out terrorist attacks on the civilized world. About what was the second part of the question? Sorry.
The first part was, what is Mongolia doing to prevent terrorist networks from operating within its borders?
The second part of the...
The second part was, what advice can you give us?
Yes. Well, I was quite surprised. At the same time, maybe it was not only the fault of one country, but I was quite surprised also to learn here in the United States that the United States was spending approximately 17 million American dollars per year as a humanitarian aid to Afghanistan. Now it's spending $1 billion for 1 month to have that war on terrorists. So I think it's not an advice, just a kind of just a natural conclusion. Maybe it's better to spend more before, to spend less after. This is the lesson we have all to learn, and that's why we have to work together.
A diplomatic question. The Dalai Lama was recently denied a transit visa by Russia to travel to Mongolia. What is Mongolia's position on the status of Tibet as a Buddhist nation? Do you support negotiations between Beijing and the Dalai Lama?
As I said, with Tibet we have, and India we have that spiritual sort of special relations because of Buddhism. We always say to the Chinese government that it's not political cooperation, it is spiritual connections. And we have a Buddhist community in the country, and according to the opinion poll conducted many times, approximately 70% of the people do consider themselves as Buddhists. And they invite His Holiness the Dalai Lama to visit Mongolia. So the government in a democratic country cannot put obstacle on the wish and desire of the people. This is the explanation we give to the Chinese. And last September, he was invited by the Buddhist. There is the headquarters of the Buddhist community. This is Ganda Monastery in Mongolia. So the Ganda Monastery extended the invitation to His Holiness. And Russia, at that time, denied transit visa for His Holiness to visit Mongolia. Well, we don't try to be involved politically in this visit, but because of this deny, we are drawn into this process as a government. So we approached the Russian government asking why whoever who wants to visit Mongolia on the invitation of or whatever organization is denied visa. And there was the response from the, my foreign minister has paid an official visit recently to Russia. They said there was some technical kind of misunderstanding, and they don't have any problem giving transit visa to His Holiness. It's a Buddhist community inviting His Holiness. It's not the government, but because of this denial, we are drawn into this kind of negotiations. So we think that in future, Buddhist community will invite His Holiness, and it'll be just a visit of a Buddhist monk, not a political figure.
At a university, this would be appropriate. You have a number of questions about education. So would you briefly describe your educational system in Mongolia? To what age must children attend school, universities, and what is the university opportunities?
Children usually start going to primary and secondary schools at the age of 8. We try to bring it down to 6, but because of the number of schools and facilities we have, we cannot solve this problem straight away. So children usually start from 8, then until 18 they have 10 grades, and now they have changed it. Now they have 11 grades, and then afterwards from 19 they go to universities or institutes. And then for 5 years, usually, they study at the universities and institutes. The government pays for a scholarship for every one child of a family in Mongolia. Of a family of a family. One of the parents of which is a public servant. So one child's expenses in the university or institute is covered by the government. Our government has started that one child's expenses also of a herder's family should be covered by the government. We cannot cover all the families of herders straight away. So we decided to make it in steps. We started from a family which has got 20 heads of goats and sheep. Recently we have increased that number up to 500. Quite soon we will increase it up to 1,000. And then gradually we will bring it to all herders' families. That every child from a herder's family will have his or her expenses covered by the government if he or she goes to the university.
Final question, which is two-part. One member of the audience wanting to know whether you've had a chance to compare Texas barbecue with Mongolian barbecue. And a more serious note to end on, after you retire, what would you want people to say was your greatest accomplishment in government?
Well, about barbecue, it's a very complicated question. It will take a lot of time and explanation, because we are meat eaters in Mongolia. So meat quality and taste is a very important question for Mongolians. So I will not try to take a lot of your time. I will just go to try Texas barbecue, and then I will, via our Honorary Consul here, Mr. Ed Story, will try to reach that person who asked that question and say my opinion. Well, there is always a formula which was put forward, used by Leo Tolstoy when he tried to say or to find out about the quality of a person. He said that the more you think about yourself, the less you are as a person. The more people people are thinking about, the more you are as a person. If it's understandable, I have translated from Russian. So I try to always to be very careful in assessing myself. So I rather leave it up to the people to assess who am I, because I think whatever assessment I give is always wrong. Whatever assessment people give, it's always right. This is my philosophy.
Mr. Prime Minister, on behalf of us all, on behalf of the Asia Society's Texas Center and this James Baker Institute for Public Policy, we want to thank you. We're pleased you could come to Texas, and of course we will hope you can come back on future occasions.
Thank you.
I would ask the audience to remain seated while the Prime Minister's party departs.
Yes, thank you very much, and I really enjoyed all of you here. Enjoyed talking with all of you here. And in conclusion, I would like to express our gratitude to the President of Rice University and to Mr. Foster, Asia Society Director of Houston, for hosting this meeting. And I would like, as a sign of our support, to give a small gift to President Gillis and to Mr. Foster. This is after this tragedy on September 11th. Mongolia has issued a stamp with Twin Towers to express that we are with you. We have these Twin Towers in our heart and also on our stamp. So I have presented this gift to President Bush and to Bush Sr. today when I met with Father Bush. And so I will give it to President Gillis and to Mr. Foster. We are with you, and we hope that the war will be soon over, and the normal process of rebuilding that country, or those small countries, will take place properly. Thank you.
And we are with you.
Very nice.
Very nice. I don't know how I can help. If you let me know.
I am going to work on the technique and